Secretary of the branch, CA Prashant Kumar. Learned speaker of today's session, CA Ramakrishnan Garu. Respected past chairman, senior members of the profession, my colleagues in the managing committee, and my dear professional colleagues, a very good evening to you all and welcome you all to this virtual seminar of today's topic, latest changes introduced in Finance Act 2021 on capital gains. Firstly, we the members of Visakhapatnam branch convey our heartfelt thanks to the speaker of today's session, CA Ramakrishnan Garu, for accepting our request and addressing the members of Visakhapatnam branch. Capital gains is the area where a lot of focus and study required since there are many interpretations and subjective issues involved. From the point of definition of capital asset, type of capital asset, long-term or short-term, to calculation of capital gains and arriving tax, etc., there are so many issues involved. From the charging section 45 to cost of acquisition under section 50C and exemptions and reinvestment options under section 54, there are quite a few issues where we all need to relearn the latest changes. The recently cost of inflation index value has been announced as 317 for the financial year 2021-22 also. To enlighten about all these latest amendments and intricacies under capital gains, we have eminent speaker C.A. Ramakrishnan Garu from Chennai. I request members to gain thorough knowledge with his deliberations. Now I request Sri Sridhar Andavarapu to introduce the speaker of today's session, C.A. Ramakrishnan Garu. Sridhar garu unmute cheyandi. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Garu. CA B. Ramakrishnan. He is a designated partner in Messrs. CNGSN and Associates LLP Chartered Accountants, and he specializes in taxation and legal compliances. CA B. Ramakrishnan is a graduate from the Madras University, a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and a graduate member of the Institute of Cost and Works Accountants of India. He has tremendous track record on the academic front, having secured ranks in both the university and chartered accountancy examinations. CA B. Ramakrishnan commenced his professional practice in the year 1991 and over 25 years of post-qualification experience. He is a renowned tax expert in South India. CA B. Ramakrishnan handles appeals in direct taxes up to the tribunal stage. He also handles complex search and seizure cases before the Settlement Commission in the areas of income tax and wealth tax. He has represented a number of high-value tax disputes which are widely reported on various tax journals and websites, including the top 100 income tax rulings published by the Tax Sutra and CCH. He has set several new precedents in the field of direct taxation, which inter alia includes some of the following landmark judgments, such as in the case of Arun XLF Foundations Private Limited versus ACTIN 166 Taxman 53, it was held that deduction under Section 10, Section 80 IB subsection 10 on the residential units constructed by the SSC be given on pro rata basis. And in the case of SSI Limited versus DCIT Chennai, 85 TTJ Chennai 1049, it was held that ease of expenditure is allowable in the hands of the SSC, in the hands of the employee, as the expenditure was claimed as per the SEBI guidelines. In the case of Dr. K. Premraj versus DCIT, 41 Taxman 81, it was held that the transfer of goodwill of profession would not be taxable as under the capital gains, under the long-term capital gains, since such income does not fall within the ambit of the provisions of Section 55, subsection 2, subclause A. The provisions of the Act were subsequently amended prospectively. He also briefs senior advocates in tax disputes before High Court and Supreme Court. Recently, He was instrumental in challenging the constitutional validity of disbanding the Honorable Income Tax Settlement Commission through the Finance Act 2021. He also handles family settlements, arbitration matters, and consultant services to various corporates and MNCs. CA B. Ramakrishnan is also representing cases under the economic laws such as the PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, the Prohibition of Benami Property Transactions Act 1988, and the Black Money, Undisclosed Foreign Income and Assets and Imposition of Tax Act 2015. He has held the following positions: former chairman, Southern Regional Chapter, India branch of the International Fiscal Association. He was a convener for the Chennai chapter of the Income Tax Settlement Commission Bar Association. He was former president, Chennai ITAT Bar Association. With these few words, I introduce CA B. Ramakrishnan to the August Gallery. Thank you, Chairman, for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, Sridhar Garu. So now I request Speaker Ramakrishnan Garu to take up the session, sir.
Thank you, Sridhar Garu, for your kind words. In this session today, I will be discussing about the changes that has been brought in by the Finance Act 2021 on capital gains. Basically, this would revolve on the capital gains taxation for partnership firms, AOPs and BOI, which is being introduced by this Finance Act, wherein a big change has been done in the way the dissolution or reconstitution of firms have been handled in the past. Briefly, I would also say about the legislative history. So prior to 1/4/1988, there was no clear provision under the Income Tax Act with regard to the transfers made by the firm to its partners or by the partners to the firm while admission or reconstitution or dissolution. The landmark judgment in the law on this subject is that the Supreme Court in the case of Mohanbai Pammabai 165 ITR 166 had said that where assessees retired from firm and received amount which included in its breakup proportionate value of goodwill, share of their interest in the firm, it could not be taxed. So due to this, the amendments were brought in the Income Tax Act to plug this kind of a situation, because previously partnership firms would be started by one person bringing in a immovable property or a capital asset and another person bringing in money and forming a partnership by contributing the asset and the money to the firm, and immediately dissolve the firm by the person bringing in the capital asset taking the money and the person bringing in the money taking the capital asset. So in order to plug this kind of tax abuse or avoidance, the amendments were brought in section 45(3) and 45(4), where 45(3), the amount that has been credited in the books of the firm towards the capital asset would be treated as the sale value for the purpose of ascertaining capital gains, and later on in 45(4), whenever dissolution happens, the market value of the asset at the time of dissolution was treated as a sale value for purpose of computing capital gains. But unfortunately, when the section was drafted, the words used in section 45(4), 45(3) did not have much of a problem. But when they drafted 45(4), the sections was drafted in such a manner which had quite a bit of ambiguity, where the section said the profits and gains from the transfer of a capital asset by way of distribution of the capital assets at the time of dissolution or otherwise shall be chargeable to tax. So dissolution, yes, it was brought to tax, but this or otherwise was being interpreted by various high courts as to whether reconstitution would be covered under that or not. So once again, is the screen share happening, sir?
Yes, sir.
Is the screen share happening?
No, sir. Only your mail is appearing. No PPT.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
One second, sir. I'll just have the screen share done. One moment, please. One moment, sir. I'll just have it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's in the desktop. It's in the desktop. Or you can-
Yes, sir. Now it is visible, sir. Yeah.
Now it's visible, right? Okay. So the the section 45(4) had run into quite a bit of litigation as to whether reconstitution would include in the or otherwise as defined in this section. So there are quite a bit of litigation. The recent ones is in the Madras High Court in the case of National Company versus ACIT. It was held that on retirement, when a partner is allotted share in the partnership assets, after deduction of the liabilities, it wouldn't amount to transfer as it doesn't fall within the ambit of or otherwise. The same view has been held by the Allahabad High Court and the Kerala High Court. And the Bombay High Court in the case of A.N. Nayak and Associates held that or otherwise would also cover cases where the retiring partner is getting assets, saying that the or otherwise can mean reconstitution or retirement of the partner. So all these matters, most of them have gone up to the Supreme Court, and the matter is pending before the Supreme Court on this issue. So in order to bring a rationalization on this matter, the amendment was brought in section 45(4) by introducing a new section of 45(4) and inserting a new section called 9B, and also the insertion of clause 48(3) and the rules 8AB and 8AC of the income tax rules. So what this intends is that the new section 9B brought in that the retirement or that is reconstitution or dissolution would get covered. 45(4) also was newly introduced with a new section, entirely new section, and the cost of acquisition for the purpose of computation for section 48(3) was also amended, and the rules for these two sections, rule 8AB and 8AC, were also notified by the CBDT. The one salient aspect in this introduction of section 45(4) or 9B is that though it is introduced by the Finance Act 2021, the amendment is applicable for assessment year 2021-22, which means that though the Act became law from 29th March 2021, the day it became an Act, it could date back to 1/4/2020. Transactions after 1/4/2020 are also covered. It is not just a prospective amendment. It is covering a year back as well. To that extent, it can be called a retrospective amendment, both Section 9B and Section 45(4). What has come by Section 9B? Section 9B says where a specified person receives during the previous year any capital asset, stock in trade, or both from a specified entity in connection with the dissolution or reconstitution of such specified entity, then the specified entity shall be deemed to have transferred such capital asset or stock in trade or both to the specified person in the year in which such capital asset or stock in trade or both are received by the specified person. So the Section 9B also defines who is the specified entity, who is a specified person. A specified entity is a partnership firm or a AOP, association of persons, or a body of individuals, and it also includes an LLP, because a partnership firm also includes an LLP. The specified person, which is covering this in this section, is a person who is a partner of the firm, a member of the AOP or the BOI in that previous year. What is reconstitution is also defined in the Section 9B as where one or more partners or members ceases to be partner or member, which means somebody retiring out of the firm, or admission or one or more partners or members where at least one of the existing partners or members remain. So it is not only covering a retirement, it is covering an admission. The third salient feature is that even if the profit sharing ratio is modified by the specified entity, being the partnership firm or AOP or body of individuals, that would also amount to reconstitution, is what is defined under the new Section 9B. So as I said earlier, firm includes LLP, and a partner in an LLP is also a specified person. And the only thing that is not getting covered is the reconstitution does not include conversion of a partnership firm into a company. Similarly, a conversion of a partnership firm into an LLP is not considered as a reconstitution of the specified entity. So this is an interpretation which is allowed in the new Section 9B. The profits and gains is also to be understood as including losses. And the term used in the section in connection with will only apply when the specified person, that is the partner or the member, receives a capital asset or a stock in trade or both in connection with a dissolution or reconstitution, and does not apply to transfers in any other case. So if, for example, if a partner is purchasing the stock in trade from the partnership firm without the event of a dissolution or reconstitution happening, then the provisions of Section 9B will not be applicable. So the main event that is precondition for the applicability of Section 9B is that there should be a dissolution or a reconstitution, and as a consequence of that, the partner who is going out or who is continuing in the firm receives a capital asset or stock in trade or both. And for the purposes of capital asset, it includes even a running business. Then the year of taxation. When does the taxation event happen. The income gets taxed in the year in the year in which the stock in trade or capital asset or both are received by the specified person, meaning the partner. So there should be a physical receipt of the asset, whether it is stock in trade or a capital asset or a combination of both. So there should be a physical asset. If there is a reconstitution or dissolution and no actual transfer of the asset take place, then the incidence of taxation gets postponed to the year in which the actual receipt happens. So this is a chart which would explain section 9B subsection 2, where it covers any profits and gains arising out of the deemed transfer by the specified entity. That is, when it is a stock in trade, what happens is that the fair market value of the stock transferred to the partner shall be recorded as sale by the specified entity, and the amount will be chargeable under the head profits and gains from business or profession in accordance with the provisions of the Act, which means the provisions of section 28 to 44 would be applicable for the purposes of computation. If it is a deemed transfer of a capital asset, subsection 2 provides that the fair market value of the capital asset as on the date of receipt of such capital asset by the partner. So it doesn't say as on the date of dissolution or reconstitution. As on the date of receipt of such capital asset by the partner or the member of the AOP or BOI shall be deemed to be the full value of consideration chargeable to tax under the head capital gains in accordance with the computation mechanism provided in section 45 to 55BA of the capital gains chapter. So in the hands of the specified entity, in the previous year in which such capital asset or stock in trade or both, it would be taxable only when it is received by the specified person, not earlier. So there should be a preceding event, and then the taxation happens in the year it is actually received by the person, namely the partner. Section 9B3 provides how the computation has to be made, which is saying the fair market value of the capital asset or the stock in trade or both as on the date it is of its receipt by the partner shall be deemed to be the full value, and this subsection is exhaustive, and hence the provisions of section 43CA or 50C and 50CA are not applicable to this to section 9B, because the deeming fiction is brought in 9B subsection 3 itself, and since it is a special provision for the reconstitution or dissolution of a firm, the provisions of 43CA, wherever an immovable property guideline application of guideline value is held as stock in trade, or if it is held as capital asset, 50C, application of the guideline value which or the transaction value, whichever is higher, that would not be applicable. And if it is a non-immovable property, the provisions of section 50CA, which is also creating a separate mechanism for the computation of ascertaining the fair market value of the non-immovable property, those provisions are all not applicable. Section 9B subsection 4 has enabled the Central Board of Direct Taxes to issue guidelines and remove the difficulty in implementing this section. And since it's a delegated legislation, as per section 9B5, it should be laid before the Parliament. The board has also come out with the rules for the implementation of the section for computation, for reporting, and various other aspects, which I will take it up later in the course of this presentation. So there is a specific provision that the 9B subsection 2 clause 2 says income chargeable to tax under the head profits and gains of business or profession or capital gains, as the case may be, shall be in accordance with the provisions of the Act. That is, the computation has to be made in accordance with the Act. No provision is found in section 9B of the Act stating that the computation shall not be negative. So this is covered by the guideline, the rules that have been notified by the CBDT. So the allowability of losses under section 70 to 74, it is presumed that it would be allowed to be carried forward and set off in accordance with the provisions of 70 to 74, whether it is under the head of profits and gains or capital gains. The section 45.4, the old section has been replaced by the new subsection 45.4, where the section says, starts with a non-obstante clause, saying that notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, which is the 45.1, where the transfer is defined and various other provisions are defined. So where it says, where a specified person receives during the previous year any money, capital asset, or both from a specified entity in connection with the reconstitution of the specified entity, then any profits and gains arising from such receipt by a specified person shall be chargeable to income tax as the income of the specified entity under the head capital gains. So, and this subsection 4, which is newly revamped, also says it will be taxed only in the year in which the specified person receives the money, capital asset, or both. The distinction between section 9B and section 45.4 is newly brought in 45.4 is that this happens only when there is a reconstitution, and it applies only when money or a capital asset or both are parted with by the firm to the partner, and it is covering only reconstitution, not dissolution, which is covered by section 9B. And both these sections have certain similarities and salient differences, which I will take you through in the presentation in due course. So the similar definitions of section 9B, whatever is defined as a specified entity to mean a firm, AOP or BOI, and the specified person being a partner of the firm or a member of the AOP or BOI are the same definitions which are also carried in the section 45.4. The difference in 45.4 and 9B, as I said, 45.4 applies only to a reconstitution, and the reconstitution is again the same definition of where one or more of the partners or members are leaving the firm, or admission of one or more partners where at least one of the existing partners remain, and the change in the profit sharing ratio, even if there is no admission or retirement of partners, and the change happens amongst the existing partners. So this is a precondition. There should be any one of these three happening, and as a consequence of this, there should be distribution. So as defined earlier, the reconstitution would not include the conversion of a partnership firm into an LLP, and the profits and gains would include losses. Now, this section applies only when the partner receives a capital asset or money or both in connection with reconstitution. So it does not apply to transfers if there is no reconstitution. or if the partner draws money without a reconstitution happening. So again, a capital asset would include even a running business. So what is the importance of the word deemed? So in the erstwhile section 45.4, the main crux was in the word of transfer. So the old section said the profits or gains arising from the transfer by way of a capital asset by way of. So there should be a distribution or division or allotment of shares to partnership upon dissolution or reconstitution of the firm. So this is because the apex court in the case of Malabar Fisheries has held that merely a mutual adjustment of rights between the partners without there being any extinguishment of the firm's rights in the partnership assets as such has no separate rights, because the partner and the partnership are treated as one and the same under the common law. The income tax law may have a person definition treating the partnership as a separate unit, but under the general law, the partnership and the partner are treated as one and the same, and it is the partners who jointly own the assets of the firm. So this, in order to curb the this problem, the section has been rationalized to say that the transfer of a capital asset to a partner on dissolution or reconstitution was brought in, and the section 45.4 would only concentrate on reconstitution, and dissolution and reconstitution is covered under section 9b. So they effectively ruling overruling all the precedents of the litigation on this subject. So again, the section 9b and 45b insists that there has to be a physical receipt of the asset. So when a partnership firm merely passes an entry of debit or credit in the account of the specified person, it would not be taxable. And if there is no transfer of the asset, even when there is a reconstitution, the taxation will not be there. The incidence of taxation will thus be postponed to the year in which there is a physical transfer of the asset. Physical transfer can also mean the transfer in the case of an immovable property through registration, or if it in the case of money by transfer into the partner's account. The section 45.4 provides for a computation mechanism as to how the capital gains has to be computed. So the section itself is a self-contained code where the entire mechanism has been computed. So it has defined a formula called A is equal to B plus C minus D. So where A is the amount chargeable to income tax as income of the specified entity, being the firm for the sake of brevity, the partnership firm under the head capital gains. B would be the value of the money received by the specified person from the specified entity on the date of such receipt. So the money would be forming part of B, plus C, that would be the fair market value of the capital asset received by the specified person on the date of such receipt, minus D. Minus D is the amount of the balance in the capital account in the books of accounts of the partnership firm of the person who is receiving the money or capital or the capital asset at the time of reconstitution. The first proviso of section 45.4 also says if the value of A, that is the amount of capital gains, is negative as per the formula, the same shall be deemed to be zero, which means if there is a capital loss computed as a result of the formula, then it would not be allowed to be set off in the year when the actual receipt of the assets happen, or it would not be allowed to be carried forward to subsequent years. So only the positive income would be taxed as capital gains. So the subsection 4 also further, the second proviso defines what should be treated as the capital account balance of the specified person. So it says where the capital account consists of any amount credited on account of revaluation of any asset, or a self-generated goodwill, or any other self-generated asset, that should be excluded. See, what used to happen is when partnership firms were having this problem of application of 45(4) in the past, the taxpayers used to credit, revalue any asset and credit the balance to the capital account of the partners and convert the partnership firm into a company with the increased credit balance, and consequently bring in a new partner, partner or an investor into the company, by which the amount of revaluation credited to the old partners, which would be not part of the share capital, could be drawn and without any incidence of tax. So in order to plug that kind of an loophole or abuse, the second proviso says the amount that can be subtracted for the purpose of computing the capital gains should not include any revaluation of any asset or any self-generated asset. So again, the explanation to the second proviso says what is a self-generated goodwill or a self-generated asset, which is saying that any self-generated asset would mean any intangible asset for which there is no cost of acquisition, which is not purchased and which has been generated during the course of business or profession by the partnership firm. So taxation in the case of the reconstitution, explanation 2 says where the capital asset is received by the specified person as a consequence of reconstitution. This is very important explanation. It says the provisions of this subsection shall operate in addition to the provisions of section 9b, and the taxation under the said provisions thereof shall be worked out independently, which means both 9b, which operates for dissolution and reconstitution, and 45(4), which operates only on reconstitution, would both apply independently, which means when there is a reconstitution, the first computation has to be done under rule 9b, under section 9b, and also 45(4). This could mean that the same transaction is getting taxed twice. So the board in the rule 8AB, which will be discussed in the later part of the presentation, and the section 48 clause 3 has been modified to nullify the impact of the double taxation, if any, that could happen due to the sections 9B and 45(4) independently operating. So the difference between the old 45(4) and the amended 45(4) is brought out in this chart. Under the old provisions, it covered only capital assets. Under the new provision, it covers money or capital asset or both. Under the old provision, it said dissolution or otherwise, and the section was silent on reconstitution, and the disputes in various courts and tribunals happened on the interpretation of the word or otherwise. Now it is strictly confined to only reconstitution, and the reconstitution is as defined under section 9B. So the scope of section 45(4) has been restricted only to reconstitution under the new provisions. Then the term used in the old section was firm, AOP or BOI. Now the new section uses the definition called specified entity as defined under section 9B, which is again the firm, AOP or BOI, and saying that the firm includes an LLP as well. The other aspect which is the distinction between the old provision and the new provision is that transferee. There was no clarity as to who will be considered as a transferee for the purpose of the section under the old provisions. In the new provisions, the section has clearly defined that the specified person who is receiving the capital asset as defined under section 9B will be the transferee. The computation mechanism also, the old section was saying that the fair market value of the assets as on the date of transfer will be the consideration. But the section was not very exhaustive with the computation mechanism as to what would be the cost allowed and various other methodology. The new section clearly provides for a computation methodology, and as discussed earlier, it's come out with a formula called A is equal to B plus C minus D, where A is the taxable capital gains, B is the value of money received by the specified person, C is the capital asset received by the person, minus D is the capital account balance with certain modifications standing in the creditor, standing to the specified person's account, whether it's a credit or a debit. So the computation of the balance in the capital account, again, the old provisions was silent, and the new provision very clearly has come out with how it has to be computed by ignoring the increase or any credit given as a result of revaluation of any asset or credit for recognizing any self-generated goodwill or intangible asset. So again, there was no concept of double taxation of income under the old provisions, because the old provision said it would be only taxable under section 45(4). The new provisions has first this section has been brought to be taxed under section 9B. So if you see the placement of section 9B in the act also, it is coming under the chapter basis of charge. So it is not coming under any head, because the section 9B wants the income to be taxed if it falls under profits and gains of business or profession, to be taxed under that head, or if it is taxable under the head capital gains, to be taxed under the head capital gain. Instead of introducing two specific provisions under both the profits and gains and capital gains, the section 9B has been brought in and placed in the chapter for basis of charge and to operate under both the situations. So in order to curb the double taxation impact, the 48 class 3 has been introduced, which provided that the tax paid under 45(4) has also a deduction, which I will take you through while discussing the rules framed in due course in this presentation. So what is the difference between the new section 9b and the new section 45.4? And when does it apply? So section 9b, as I had stated earlier, would apply first when there is a dissolution or a reconstitution, and if there is a receipt of a capital asset or stock in trade or both by a partner of the firm. I'm just using the terminology partner of the firm for the sake of convenience. It includes a member of the AOP or a BOI as well. So in section 45.4, it only discusses about a reconstitution and not dissolution, and it only treats the capital asset or money or a combination of both received by a partner of a firm in connection with the reconstitution of the firm. Section 9b covers dissolution. 45.4 does not cover dissolution. Section 9b covers stock in trade but not cash. Section 45.4 covers cash but not covers stock in trade. Again, income arising on transfer of the asset. The amount is taxable in the hands of the firm. Here, even though it arises in the hands of the partner, it is taxable in the hands of the firm. The computation mechanism, section 9b says that the fair market value is deemed to be the fair value of consideration, and the computation would be in accordance with chapter 4c, which is profits and gains of business or profession, or for 4d, which is capital gains. For 45.4, it is given in the provisions of 45.4 itself as a formula. Indexation benefit is available as for section 9b. It says the computation has to be done in accordance with the provisions of the Act. In the case of 45.4, the section itself provides a computation mechanism, and therefore there is no mention of indexation under 45.4. What happens in a situation of loss? The section 9b has no provision regarding losses. So it is interpreted that the computation of income can result in a loss which could be claimed. Section 45.4 clearly says if there is a loss, it shall be treated as nil. The salient feature is that the definition of section 247, which covers a transfer definition where extinguishment or relinquishment of rights, all these are not covered under the new 45.4 at the time of dissolution, because it is not covering dissolution. The new 45.4 only covers reconstitution. So as I stated earlier, in the case of reconstitution, the income is chargeable both independently under section 9b as well as 45.4, and rule 8d AB will come to the rescue for nullifying the impact of double taxation. Section 48.3 of the Act has also been amended in order to have the seamless amendments that are brought through section 9b and 45.4. And basically the section as stated in the finance bill, it says in order to mitigate double taxation arising out of introduction of section 9b and substitution of section 45.4. So how the double taxation is being nullified is through the new clause 3 to provide that whatever is taxed in the hands of the firm would be reduced while computing the capital gains for purpose of 45(4) if it is already taxed under 9B. In other words, the amount of capital gains computed under section 45(4), which is attributable to the capital asset being transferred by the firm upon reconstitution, shall be deducted while computing the capital gain again in the hands of the firm for the application of section 45(4). So whatever is already brought to tax under 9B will be allowed as a deduction. So this is the extract of section 48 clause 3, and the manner is now prescribed by rule 8 AB, which has been notified very recently in this month by the CBDT. So how the capital gain has to be computed under section 9B read with section 48(3). The full value of the consideration received or accrued would be the fair market value of the capital asset less expenditure wholly incurred with the transfer, again cost of acquisition or indexed cost of acquisition, improvement, and the amount chargeable to tax as income of the firm under section 45(4), which is attributable to the capital asset being transferred, will be arrived at by this formula, and the exemptions under section 54 to 54 GB would be allowed. So the rate of taxation would depend on the nature of capital asset transferred, whether it is short term or long term, held by the partnership firm. Rule 8 AB, which has been recently notified, prescribes the manner to compute the attribution of income taxable under section 45(4) to the capital assets remaining with the specified entity for the purpose of 48(3). And the specified entities are also required to furnish the details in form number 5C. So rule 8 AB 2 and 3 of the rules cover the following aspects. It says where the aggregate value of money and the fair market value of the capital asset received by a specified person from the specified entity is in excess of the balance in his capital account, then the chargeability to tax is as under section 45(4). So first part is where it relates to revaluation of any capital asset or valuation of self-generated asset or self-generated goodwill, then the amount attributable to the capital asset remaining with the specified entity is also prescribed under 48(3). It says it should be in the same proportion as the increase in or recognition of the value of that asset because of revaluation or valuation to the aggregate increase to the value of all assets because of revaluation or valuation. What happens is basically when the fair market value is adopted for all assets that are taken away by the partner upon reconstitution, the excess value which are remaining, they are getting readjusted in order to avoid the double taxation in the future. And the clause 3 says where it does not relate to any revaluation of any capital asset or valuation of any self-generated asset or self-generated goodwill of a specific entity, then the amount charged to tax under section 45(4) shall not be attributed to any capital asset for the purpose of 48(3). So two distinctions are being brought where it involves a revaluation, then the value of the continuing assets are adjusted. I will take you through the computation mechanism in the subsequent slides. So the rule also says where the aggregate of money and the fair market value of the capital asset received by the partner from the firm is in excess of the balance of his capital account charged to tax under 45(4) relate to only capital gains received by a specified person from the firm. The amount charged to tax shall not be attributed to any asset for the purpose of 48 clause 3. Again, rule 8 AB 5 to 7 prescribes how the partnership firm has to report the transactions in the annual filings. It says the specified entity shall furnish the details of the amount attributed to the capital asset remaining in the firm in Form 5C, which is to be furnished electronically by digital signature or EVC, and to be verified in accordance with 140 and section 140, and to be furnished within the time allowed for filing the return of income in the year in which the amount is chargeable to tax under section 45(4). So subsection 8 has also given the power, sub rule 8 has also given the powers to the Principal Director General Systems and the Directors General Systems to specify the procedure for the reporting in Form 5C and the procedure format, all these aspects. It has delegated to them to furnish these details, how these details have to be furnished and what is the details to be furnished in the specified forms. So there are a few explanations to Rule 8 AB. Explanation 1, again, it says the amount chargeable to tax under 45(4) shall relate to revaluation if the revaluation is based on a valuation report obtained from a registered valuer as defined under Rule 11UG. So if there is a revaluation of any asset as a result of the application of 45(4), then a valuation report has to be there from a registered valuer. If again it is a revaluation of a self-generated goodwill or a self-generated asset, revaluation does not entitle the specified entity to claim the depreciation on the increase in the value of that asset on account of revaluation. So if it is only a tangible asset where it is revalued, you have the benefit of the depreciation to be carried forward on the continuing assets in the firm. And the self-generated asset and self-generated goodwill, as I had stated earlier, they are already defined under explanation 1 clause 2 to subsection 45 to section 45(4). And the CBDT circular 14 of 2021 dated 2nd July 2021 has come out with the guidelines for section 9B and section 45(4). And this circular clearly says that the amount taxed under section 45(4) is required to be attributed to the remaining assets, so that when the remaining assets get transferred, remaining capital assets, let me be very specific, because if it is stock in trade, it doesn't get covered under 45(4). When the remaining capital asset get transferred in the future, the amount attributed to such capital asset get reduced from the full value of consideration to the extent the specified entity does not pay tax on the same amount again. So this attribution is given in the Act only for the purpose of section 48 of the Act and applies only to capital assets which are not forming part of block of assets. For capital assets forming part of the block of assets, provisions of section 43(6)(c) of the Act determine the WDV of the block of asset, and section 50, which is short-term capital gains, would be computed whenever those assets are being transferred. So, as I stated earlier, Rule 8AB clarified that it also applies to assets which are capital assets which are part of block of assets. So wherever the capital asset is appearing in Rule 8AB, it has been clarified that it would refer to a capital asset whose capital gains is computed under Section 48, as well as the capital asset forming part of block of assets. So wherever the reference is made for the purpose of Section 48, reference has to be also deemed to include the actual cost defined under 43(6) Clause C and the application of Section 50, which is short-term capital gains for the purpose of computation. So now, the application of 9B of the Act and subsection 45(4), I will take some examples which would be helping for a better understanding of how these provisions and the rule would apply for the assessment year 21-22 onwards, which includes for any transaction falling, which comes under the definitions falling under Section 9B and 45(4) from 1/4/2020. Say, for the first example, let us assume that there are three partners, A, B, and C, having 1/3 share each. And the firm owns 3 pieces of land, S, T, and U. And we also assume that the land has been held for more than 2 years and there is no other capital asset in the firm. Further, in the event when A wishes to exit the firm, how the whole application would be there. The firm revalues the land based on the valuation report as from a valuer as defined under Rule 11U of the income tax rules. Now, these are the illustration I would take you through. The capital balance of each of the partner is, say, rupees 10 lakhs. And the book value of each land piece being called S, T, and U are, say, 10 lakhs each. Now, as per the valuation report, land S is 70 lakhs, land T is 70 lakhs, land U is 50 lakhs. Now, the partner A, when he goes out of the firm decides to give him land U plus rupees 11 lakhs in the form of money. And the indexed cost of the land is 15 lakhs. We are assuming this number for the purpose of convenience. Since the land is held for more than 2 years, it is treated as a long-term capital asset and eligible for indexation. So, how it is to be computed under Rule 9B and 45(4) is as under. Amount taxable under Section 9B in the hands of the firm as long-term capital gains is, if you see the earlier example, he is getting the land parcel U, which is 50 lakhs. So that is the 50 lakhs here. And the indexed cost of the land is 15. So this 35 lakhs is the long-term capital gains, which is taxable in the hands of the firm. Just assuming for the purpose of illustration and ease of calculation, we apply a tax of 20% for this 35 and the tax comes to 7 lakhs. So the net book profit after tax to be credited in the capital account of each of the partner is 50, which is the fair market value of the asset land parcel U, minus 10, which is the book value of the land U, and minus 7, which is the tax on the capital gains arising out of this transfer. So 50 minus 10 minus 7 would be 33, which, since we have assumed that all the three partners are sharing the profits and losses equally, 33 gets divided into three people at 11 lakhs each. So the capital account of A, which already had a 10 lakhs balance, will be credited with rupees 11 lakhs, and he is having a new capital balance of 21 lakhs. So, as I said earlier, it is E, which is here, is the value of the fair market value of the land as valued by the registered valuer. That is the example that we have taken. So now the capital account of the partner going out is 21. Next calculation is that the amount received by A on going out is 11 lakhs in the form of money and 50 lakhs in the form of land. So he is receiving totally 61 lakhs. Now amount which is already taxed under 45(4) in the hands of the firm is that the difference between 61 and 21 being the balance arrived as calculated in the earlier slide. That is 10 lakhs is his original capital balance, and the 11 lakhs, which is 1/3 arising on account of the revaluation of the asset that is going out of the firm. So he's got a 21 as his balance, and since he is getting 61 and his revised capital balance is 21, the total amount taxable is 40. Now 35 lakhs is already taxed under the head capital gains for under 9B. So when this 40 is to be taxed, the amount of 40 lakhs is to be attributed to the remaining assets of the firm for the purposes of giving the benefit on subsequent sale of the capital assets in the firm. So the 40 has to be credited to the two land parcels which are continuing in the firm. As in the first slide, I had said that the land S is 70, land T is 70, which is basically 1:1 is the ratio of the remaining assets in the firm. So this 40, which is the amount taxed under 45(4), will have to be attributed to the existing remaining land parcels in the firm by crediting 20 each to each land parcel, and for the purposes of a subsequent sale, the land S and T will be carried with a number of 90 and 90 and not with their existing amount of 70. So when either of these lands get sold in the future, the amount attributed to them would be reduced. That is what, when it is subsequently sold, the 70 would be treated as cost and given the appropriate indexation, and the 20, which is already taxed through 45(4), will be also allowed to be reduced when these land parcels, either of them, whenever it gets sold. So the amount of 40 lakhs in the example, which is charged to tax under section 45(4), it will be attributed to these two assets. So this is one example. I will take another example with a small modification where again more or less same assumptions of three partners sharing profits and losses equally, three land parcels in the firm, and assuming that there are no other assets and they are also long-term capital asset, and one of the partner wants to exit. And in order to settle the partner, now the modification is that in order to settle the partner, the land parcel U is sold by the firm to a third party, and the firm revalues the balance land parcels S and T based on the valuation report. And what happens is, this is the kind of a scenario. Capital balance of rupees 10 lakhs in each of the partners. Book value of the land, let us assume that it is 10 lakhs for each piece of parcel of land. Now, the actual sale consideration for transferring the land U, this will get taxed not under 45(4) or Rule 9B. This will get taxed in the normal course of applying the sale consideration and less the indexed cost. So 50 minus 15. So the fair market value of the balance lands is 70 and 70, assuming the same example which we have discussed in the first one. So when this is the case and the firm pays 61 lakhs straight away by way of money to the partner who is exiting. So what happens in this case? In this case, this, as I said, 35 would get under taxed under normal methodology for capital gains, and assuming there's a tax of 7 on this 35. So now the net book profit, which is to be credited in the capital account of each partner, would be 50, which is the sale value, minus 10, which is the book value of the land U, minus 7 is the amount of tax paid. So again, this example also has an increase of 33 for each of the partner, getting 11 lakhs each, because we have assumed that they are sharing it equally. Now, what would be the capital account balance of the exiting partner? He is got a capital account balance of 10 as per the books, and this 11 which gets credited as a result of the sale of the property. So his balance is 21. He gets 61 when he is leaving the firm. So the difference of 61 minus 21, which is 40, this is the long-term capital gains, which is chargeable to tax. So amount taxable under section 45(4) in the hands of the firm, in addition to an amount of 35 already charged, would be this 40, and this 40 would get attributed to the remaining assets. And since we have assumed that the remaining assets are in the same value proposition, the 40 gets divided amongst them equally. So the final result in both the examples are the same due to operation of section 9B. Now, the relief is that when either of the land, in the example 2, when it gets sold, the amount attributed to the say at the time of sale of the remaining assets, this 40 lakhs which has already been taxed would be allowed to be deducted, and it would 20 each to each of the asset, 20 lakhs each to the asset would be taken as the value in terms of Rule 8AB. Now, application of section 9B and 45(4) in another example, we can bring out how the though in the earlier two examples the results were more or less the same, even though the distribution in one was a combination of a capital asset plus money, and in the second one it was only money. This one has a kind of a small variation with an intangible asset also being brought in. How it operates is like this. Assuming the same partnership firm having three partners with 1/3 of profits and losses shared amongst themselves, and there is one piece of land which is a long-term capital asset, and there is also one patent which was acquired and it is 1 year old, and there is cash. The one of the partner wants to exit. The firm revalued its land and patent based on the valuation report. We'll see how these unfold. So capital account balance in each of the partner, let us assume that they have 1 crore or 100 lakhs each. Book value of the piece of land is 30. The written down value, because patent is a depreciable asset and forming part of the block of assets, the WDV of the patent is 45 lakhs. Then there is a cash balance in the firm or whatever, money, I would say, not just cash balance. In the form of money, there is 2.25 crores or 225 lakhs. Now, as per the valuation report, the valuer has stated that land, yes, is 45 lakhs as against a book value of 30. The patent is valued at 60 lakhs as against a written down value of 45. And the firm also has a self-generated goodwill of 30. And the indexed cost of acquisition of the land, because it's a capital asset long term, it is 45. Let us assume that it is 45 lakhs. So on exit of the partner, the firm decides to give him just 75 lakhs of money plus land, yes. Now, how does the computation work? The computation would work like this. The amount taxable under Section 9B in the hands of the firm as capital gains would be that the land, we have said that it is 45 lakhs here, and the indexed cost of land is 45. So it is 0. So amount taxable as capital gains under Section 9B would be 0. And under Section 45(4), both it will be 0. However, there are other assets. So the book profit has to be computed for the purpose of credit to the capital account. So 45 is the value of the land which is being transferred. The book value of the land is 30, and 15 lakhs will be the book profit after tax, because tax is 0 as worked out in the earlier slide. So each partner gets credited of 5 lakhs each. So Mr. A, who is going out, has 1 crore in his capital account already, and this 5 lakhs gets added, which is the net book profit after tax. So taking it to 105 lakhs. So what Mr. A receives is 75 lakhs of money plus 45 lakhs worth of land, making it 1 crore 20 lakhs. So the amount taxable under the head 45(4) would be 15 lakhs, which is 120 minus 105. So now this 15 lakhs is to be attributed to the remaining assets in accordance with the Rule 8AB. Now, what is the amount attributable? 15. Now, what is the remaining asset? The remaining asset is the patent. This patent of 60 lakhs and the self-generated goodwill of 30 lakhs are continuing in the firm, which is in the ratio of 2:1. I have assumed that for the sake of convenience and calculation, it would be easy. Depending on the actual numbers in the facts of each assessee's case, it has to be worked out. So now this 15 lakhs gets split to the patent, which is 1/3, and self-generated goodwill 2/3. Sorry, it should be the other way around. I think this slide, it is 2/3 and 1/3. The 10 to the patent and 5 to the self-generated goodwill, in the same ratio of the original cost. So now in example 3, this 5 lakhs attributed to the patent will not be added to the block of assets, and no depreciation benefit will be available for this amount of attribution to the patent. However, whenever the patent gets sold in the future, this 5 lakhs which is attributed can be reduced. So for the purposes of depreciation, this increased attribution for the continuing assets will not be there for the assets which fall under the block of assets, because depreciation will only be allowed under the actual cost incurred and not for the notional value. Further, whenever the transfer happens, the sale value will have to be created to the block of assets under section 50, and if the entire block gets exhausted, it would become a short-term capital gains, which is the usual computation mechanism which is prescribed. So the other that is to, if the patent is sold in the future for 25 lakhs, 5 lakhs which is attributed earlier will be reduced, and this 20 lakhs only will be credited to the block of assets in the intangible block. Similarly, when goodwill is transferred in the future, the amount attributed will get allowed to be reduced for the purpose of computation whenever it gets sold in the future. So, as I stated, that this becomes taxable as short-term capital gains because these are depreciable assets. Rule 8AC has also been notified, and this has been notified to bring in the prohibition to claim deduction for depreciation on goodwill, as goodwill will no longer be treated as a intangible asset under the amended provisions. The section 2 subsection 11 of the Income Tax Act has been amended, where the block of assets was defined. It now specifically excludes goodwill of a business or profession from the purview of block of asset. So section 32(1) subclause 2, which also gave an open-ended interpretation, room for interpretation, saying that any other right of commercial, any commercial right to be eligible for depreciation under the intangible assets, it now specifically excludes goodwill of a business or profession from the definition of the intangible assets to make them ineligible for depreciation. Again, section 50 has also been amended to provide a method for short-term capital gains and written down value, and rather to recompute if there is a goodwill already in the block of intangible assets, how it has to be excluded for and from the assessment year 21-22 onwards. So Rule 8AC prescribes this mechanism, and it says where goodwill is the only asset or one of the asset in the block of intangible assets for which depreciation was obtained in the assessment year, then assessment year commencing first day of April 2020, the WDV for the previous year relevant to the assessment year 21-22 shall be determined as under. What does it say is that the amount has to be excluded from the block of assets. How is what it is prescribed under the rules. It says where the written down value of the assets exceeds the aggregate of where the reduction exceeds the aggregate value of the written down value and the actual cost of any other intangible asset other than goodwill acquired during the previous year 21-22, then such excess shall be deemed to be the capital gains arising from the transfer of short-term capital asset. So how this is to be computed, I will take you through an example shortly in the future slides. It also prescribes that, the rules also prescribe that without prejudice to sub-rule 8 AC3 and section 55, where goodwill of a business or profession is the only asset in the intangible block for which depreciation was claimed earlier, then the block is deemed to be ceasing and there will be no capital gains or loss on the seizure of this entire block. So if there was a goodwill on which depreciation was claimed up to assessment year 2021, it is and the goodwill is the only asset in the intangible block, the entire block is deemed to have been seized and there will be no capital gains or loss. However, when goodwill is one of the assets, then the practical aspect of how the computation has to be done, I will take you through an example. So the value of the goodwill has to be, whatever written down value has to be excluded from the block, and if it results in a capital gain by exhausting the entire block, even though there are other assets in the block, if it's getting exhausted, then the provisions of section 50 will apply. Now, whether a transfer of an agricultural land, these are some of the practical issues that have come up because of the introduction of this new provisions, as to whether an agricultural land held by a specified entity, which is the partnership firm, when it is transferred to the specified person, whether it will be taxable under 9B or section 45(4). See, since agricultural land is not covered under the definition of capital asset, if the land is held as a capital asset, it will not be taxed under the head capital gains. However, if you have noticed, as I stated earlier, section 9B also covers stock in trade and any transfer arising of a stock in trade. If the agricultural land is held as a stock in trade by the firm, then it gets taxed under section 9B, though it may not get taxed under section 45(4). Because 45(4) excludes stock in trade, and agricultural land not being a capital asset, it will get not taxed under 45(4). However, it will get taxed under 9B if it is held as stock in trade by the partnership firm. There are another issue which can come up where the partnership firm is converted into a company and shares are allotted to the specified person who are the partners of the firm. Whether 9B and section 45(4) would be applicable. the interpretation that we have been taking, this is my personal view, is that since the shares are not allotted in connection with dissolution, the provisions of section 9b will not be applicable, as they are allocated on account of the conversion, which falls outside the scope of 9b. But wherever the firm is subsequently dissolved, also the taxation will not come to the allotment of shares, as there is no shares allotted consequent to the dissolution, because the section says the assets, namely section 9b, the assets have to be allotted in connection with dissolution or reconstitution, and it covers both capital asset and stock in trade. However, when a firm is converted into a company and the firm is getting dissolved, the allotment of shares is not on account of the dissolution, but it is on account of the conversion. So therefore, it doesn't get attracted to be taxed under 9b. However, it will also not get taxed under 45(4) also, because 45(4) does not cover dissolution. So if it is a partnership firm getting converted into a company, you will have the regular provisions of section 47 wherever it gets exempted subject to the conditions specified therein of section 47, whether it would get taxed or not. It would not get covered under the new provisions of 9b or 45(4). But the conversion, if it is compliant with the transactions not deemed to be transfer under section 47, it would be out of that. If it is falling within the not falling within the conditions specified in 47, the conversion will get taxed independently, but not on application of this. So there wouldn't be a situation where a dissolution, it would not cover a dissolution, and therefore it would not come under capital gains. That is the interpretation which we are giving whenever a firm is converted into a company, because it is now coming out of 45(4), and whether it is exempt or not under 47 has to be examined. Another issue is the firm getting dissolved when there are two partners and the firm is getting dissolved as a result of a death of a partner. What happens in that situation? Section 159 says that where a person dies, his legal representative shall be liable to pay any sum which the person deceased would have been liable to pay if he had not died. However, section 9b, the incidence of taxation is on the very specific definition. It only says if a partner, not a dead partner, sorry to use the word, if a living partner, it says a partner of a firm or a member of AOP or BOI receiving the asset. So a legal heir of a partner receiving the asset as a consequential of the dissolution of the firm on account of the death of a partner, it would not attract section 9b, and also it would not attract section 45(4), because the same definition of the specific person is there in section 9b as well as 45(4). So if the legal heirs are receiving the assets upon the death of a partner, that situation is not being covered in the existing provisions, and I am not sure whether a suitable amendment will be brought in subsequently as a prospective measure or as a clarification or a retrospective amendment in this section to also cover a legal hair. So this is one of the gray areas that are still prevalent in the new provisions. Similarly, when the partner is liable to pay capital gains on the asset transferred by the firm to the extent it is in excess of the balance in their capital account, yes, the tax is to be paid by the firm and not by the partner. So therefore, the firm only will be liable to pay the tax and not the person or the partner. The specific person being the partner is not liable to pay the tax. However, if the firm is not paid the tax, I'm just assuming a situation by not paying the relevant tax. If the firm has not paid, the partner till the date in to which he has continued as a partner, either on account of dissolution or retirement, he would be personally liable to that extent. But the incidence of tax is only on the firm and not to the partner who is receiving the assets. The section has not clarified certain other provisions or practical aspects because I think since it is introduced only in this Finance Act, it has quite a bit of evolution required, and the jurisprudence also will evolve over a period of time. One of the issues is, as I said, whether the provisions of section 189 can be invoked upon dissolution of the specified entity, whether the claim of 54 EC is allowable for section 45(4), because for section 9B, the section clearly provides that the computation has to be made in accordance with the Act. So all the exemptions under section 54 EC, because other exemptions as to 54 or all other exemptions arise only for an individual or a HUF or arising on account of a relocation, which is not the case when 45(4) is applicable. Only the exemption as to whether 55 EC will be available or not has not been clarified, and maybe that would again evolve through case laws. Further, the method to compute the fair market value of the asset transferred, whether the stamp duty value is to be adopted or whether the fair market value as per section 2 subsection 22B has to be adopted, that is again a gray area. Though we claim that the provisions of section 50C or 43CA, or as the case may be 50CA, are deeming provisions, and these are also a specific deeming provision, the new sections 99B and 45(4), and each will not operate together and they will operate independently. So these are areas that require clarifications, or this would be forming part of issues that may be disputed in the future. Further, the section 45(4) clearly says any money received by the partner on reconstitution. Say, on reconstitution, one of the terms of reconstitution is to give a interest-free loan or an interest-bearing loan, whether that would be treated as a separate transaction not getting covered by the value of money under section 45(4) or not, whether it will get covered or not is a big if, because people can, the taxpayers can also take umbrage on this, saying that there is an interest-free loan given and it is not a money paid upon reconstitution. So this is again a gray area, because a loan is actually money requires to be repaid on a future date. But whether it would be constituting as money received by the partner for the purpose of capital gains, it's a big question which will get decided in the future. Again, the amount of deduction to be claimed for the purpose of computing profits and gains of business and profession or capital gains, as the case may be, in situations where the original asset has been purchased by payment of cash, because the section 43(1) clearly says any asset purchased by payment of cash exceeding specified amounts will not be eligible for depreciation. So whether this amount would be allowed as a deduction, because the computation mechanism says the amount, whatever is there in the written down value should be, written down value of the asset should be allowed as a deduction. Whether that would only mean the actual cost which is otherwise eligible for depreciation, or whether it is the actual cost paid, that is again a issue that can come up in the future. So dear friends, I conclude my presentation with this, and I'm free to take any questions on the presentation if you have any.
Thank you very much, sir, for your excellent and detailed presentation. Members, any queries? Please unmute
Yes, Mr.
yourself.
Borle Krishna. Yes, Mr. Borle Krishna.
Yeah, Kamsas,
Yes.
please, sir.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
go down to your slide number 37 of the PPT, sir. Wherein you have deducted the capital gains chargeable under 45(4) from the capital gains chargeable under 9B. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir.
See, in slide number 37, capital gains chargeable under 45 subsection 4 has been deducted from the capital gains chargeable under section 9 capital B. And subsequently under rule 8AB, when we are elucidating, capital gains under 45(4) has been distributed over the remaining. Are we getting the twin benefit, one by way of a deduction under 9B and also under rule 8AB by way of apportionment to the remaining?
I get your query, sir. Actually, the distinction is if you don't have any other asset, if you have other assets only, it gets distributed. If there are no other assets in the firm, it would not get distributed or attributed.
So my submission is, sir, if there are other assets, we are going to get the double benefit, one by way of a deduction under 9B.
No, you will not get a double deduction, sir. It would. The rules have only brought in to eliminate double taxation. So you will not get a double deduction. If you have assets, then it gets distributed. If you don't have assets, I think that slide has to be modified to elaborate that only it can be allowed if you don't
If
have
you
any
do not
other.
have other assets, it is the first slide 37 that applies.
Yes,
If you do have other assets,
it gets distributed.
Rule 8AB.
Yes,
Am I right, sir?
yes, you are right, sir. It has to be
No,
distributed.
I'm not here to find any.
No, sir. Sir, this is a new section which is
Completely new, sir. Totally.
this is a new section which is to be applied this year. So everybody are here to learn.
Naturally, yes, sure.
Hello.
Naturally,
Hello.
yes.
Yes, sir.
See, Pral, you have taken painstakingly gone through the minute details. See, after all, I thought, is it a double benefit that we are getting? Thank you for the clarification, sir.
Sure.
Any other members, any queries? Please unmute yourself and you can pose your question.
సార్ రామకృష్ణ గారు ఏం చెప్పాలనుకుంటున్నారా?
ఏం లేదు సార్. If there are no further questions, I think.
No, not you, sir.
Another Ramakrishna, our member.
Oh, okay.
Members, or else you can write your query in the chat box also.
You can hear it now,
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
sir. See, my question is regarding indexation and what you call period held by the previous owner. Nothing has been specified in the new provisions.
Sir, please louder, sir. Please louder.
Pardon,
Bit louder.
clear?
Voice is very low, sir. Very low.
Very low, huh?
Yes, sir.
How is it now?
Okay, sir.
Able to clear here?
I can hear, sir. Can go ahead, sir.
Yeah. See, the period held when a partner is going to sell the asset which he receives from the partnership firm. So what is whether it will be considered as a long term or short term? If I receive the asset today and sell it tomorrow, what will be the period that will be considered for counting the period of holding?
The period of holding, sir, for the asset received by the partner will be from the day he has become the owner. The period held by the firm will not get included in that.
49 is not clear on that regard, and when I sell the asset, the period held by the previous owner has to be considered invariably.
No, sir, 49 contemplates only certain situations when you receive it as a gift or inheritance or otherwise.
Now, this being a new provision,
This is not a gift, sir. This is a realignment of the partnership assets, because a partner is also he owns the partnership assets jointly with the other partners, and the partnership firm is treated as a separate taxable entity, though under the common law it is not treated as such, but the firm is the owner and the firm is transferring it, and it is the capital gains are attracted to the firm.
Yes, that is very correct. Because
And when the partner, after becoming the owner, he has to qualify whether it is held as a long term or short term, depending on the period of his holding. The partnership firm's holding will not get added to his period of holding, and for the purposes of his cost of acquisition, it would be the value at which it was assigned for settlement by the firm. So if the land is assigned at 50 lakhs based on some valuation report, and the land is paid to the partner for retirement or on dissolution, the cost of acquisition for him would be the 50 lakhs which is assigned, which is already been taxed.
I believe this needs some further clarification.
Yeah, again it is it can.
It's going to create a.
This is my view, sir. Again, this is been introduced only now.
Yeah.
Through this Finance Act 2021. It will go through its own set of litigation because there are certain aspects that we feel it requires clarification or necessary amendments.
This is one amongst them.
Now, this would be one of them where it can also attract some litigation.
See, because if I go to 49.5 in the context of 5610,
Yes,
wherein it says that in the case where 50C cases, when the amount is chargeable to tax under section 5610, that amount would be treated as a cost to the asset.
yes.
So same situation would be arising over here also. Because it is taxed of the firm,
Yes.
it should also be treated as a cost to the SSC, that is the partner.
The small distinction between including 56 as part of 49 is that when a person is receiving an asset below the market value,
Correct?
or at zero cost or at below market value, then the difference is taxed in his hands already under 56. So subsequently, when he sells, that is allowed as a deduction under 49.
Similarly, the firm is charged to tax over here.
Here, the firm has already paid the tax.
So obviously, the expenditure to the firm would be cost to the SSC.
Yes.
So that part, I mean, it's only a dilemma, it's only a doubt.
Yeah, it is an issue which can be debated.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Any more queries from members? I hope there are no more queries from our participants. So now I request our Secretary CA Prashant Kumar to propose vote of thanks.
Respected Chairman C.S. Muralikrishna Garu, Land Speaker C.A. B. Ramakrishnan Ji, senior members, past chairmen and professional colleagues and other dignitaries, good evening to all. I am privileged to propose vote of thanks for this session on my own behalf and behalf of the Visakhapatnam members. Sir, I convey my heartfelt gratitude for accepting our invitation, being with us to share your knowledge and valuable experience with our all Visakhapatnam branch members. Sir, your deliberations on latest changes in capital gains in the perspective of partnership firm and your explanation on the sections 45, 45(4), 159, 9B and 8AB, 8AC with the practical examples, and also you also deliberated on the how to calculate the capital gains or on these sections are excellent and exhaustively covered, sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful deliberations. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Dear members, request your attention on the upcoming programs. That is on 27th Saturday. This Saturday we have a session on enhancing productivity using MS Excel by CA Dungarchand U. Jain from Madurai from 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. I request the members please join and get benefited out of it.
It is 24th. It is 24th July Saturday.
24th July Saturday. This Saturday only. And thank you all the webinars for joining, and I also thank you for giving this opportunity to our chairman. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you, Ramakrishnan ji.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your valuable time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.